Frank M. in the GSO with us. He's been at GSO, I understand, for 17 years. Secretary to the Lady Over Archives, right? Until 1982. And now he's over the archives in New York. I don't know about everyone else, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to tell us about the history of AA. Help me welcome Frank M.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Frank. I'm an alcoholic, and I don't know. We had to make it difficult for everybody with a working mic and everything, but that's the way we do it. Why should we be comfortable, right? I want to thank, before I get into this thing too far, I want to thank you all for having me. You've really made me very comfortable. I got this huge container of fruit, which I think all of us could eat over the weekend and be happy. And also I was picked up by Rudy and Pam at the airport, and that was a nice experience. I picked them up. And then we had a nice ride in through Memphis, so I saw where Elvis, of course, lived, and all the other sites in Memphis. And then they filled us full of, I have a very high cholesterol, about 240 something, and last night we pigged out on ribs and everything that, as you Southern people know, is cooked and fried and watered down with lard, and if I drop dead before your eyes, pray for me. I love living on the edge. Right after that, my friend Martha and I had to have big bowls of ice cream. Wasn't enough. Had to test bait still a little further. I want to thank Martha, too, and Judy and Ann for smoothing the way. The wonderful speakers. It's been a very moment for me. I mean, I've learned a lot from each of the speakers. They've said things that I'm open for some reason. I know the reason in my life, but I won't go into it. We're here to talk about archives. But I'm open to a transforming experience. And as you know, AA is alive with that and with immense possibilities. And I'm going to talk a little about that. A lot of people think the archives is about ancestor worship in AA. That we put pictures up of the old-timers and worship them and stuff like that. And anybody who's been in archives for a while, and Franklin, we do treasure early-timers like Franklin because somehow they've been able to hold on to a message that we need to hear. And I think that's what the archives are about. Carl Sandburg wrote that whenever society or civilization perishes, there is always one condition present. They forgot where they came from. The archives are about remembering where we came from. I have to own my own history, otherwise I'm going to be recycled. I have to hear my own story, and people like Martha and Judy talk their stories, and Don, who's coming up. For me to reignite an old memory of the way I was, and the way I could be again without this fellowship, living the kind of life on the edge that I did most of my life. So I need my own personal history. And I believe as a fellowship, we have to own our collective history. Otherwise, we may perish. And I'll get into some of that. Success is more corrosive to me personally than failure. When I walked into AA, I didn't, when I crawled probably, I was flung into AA is the way I really feel it. Nature flung me into AA the way nature flings other alcoholics into homicides or suicides or under buses or sucked into subways, however nature handles most of us. A few of us are flung into AA. And I was flung with enough velocity that I stuck. By the way, my sobriety date is June 10th, so you don't think I don't have one. June 10th, 1970. And I didn't know that for a long time, but that's Dr. Bob's anniversary, too. So I didn't want to change that once I knew that. I knew I was going to be the archivist one day, and that could come in handy. Also, what helped me in the beginning, I had a friend of mine, and he said, "Frank, don't lose your place in line." And I knew what that meant. Whatever happened, you didn't lose your place in line. When you came in, that was the time for you to come in. And anyway, one day I found myself in the metal chairs, as most meetings have, those metal chairs, on a hot summer, humid day in New York. I think I had the same suit on. I still quite like it. I hadn't worked for a year, but I had to look like I worked. You know, that kind of thing. You know, indemnitus, sweating in January, but here it was June, so I was really sweating. And looking like I was okay. You know, I'm a typical alcoholic. I'm always fine. You know, I could have fresh rope burns on my neck, but I'm fine. You know, pride. Shame is my most powerful emotion because pride is my biggest sin. You know, I don't mind suffering. I just don't want anyone to know it. And I'm not even sure I want to know it myself. So I distract myself from my own suffering. Anyway, I was most open to the principles that we have here when I entered AA. You know, if you said you had to eat Tootsie Rolls every 3 hours, I'd have done it. You know, I was that open. I was so crushed by life, by alcoholism, that I could listen, and I did. You know, and I also was stuck to those metal chairs, which help if you're a sweater and you have a metal chair, and it's hard to leave with a chair stuck to you. So I adhere to AA with all the nobility that if you took a bug with enough velocity against that wall, the body juices of the bug would stick it to the wall. And my alcoholism is violent enough that I've stuck. And I think everything is in the sticking. You know, as you stick, you find out more and more about yourself. I didn't think much was wrong with me other than, like Martha, I may have had trouble the last 6 months. Not finding work, I thought, was my trouble. You know. And anyway, like all of us, I found out I'd never really known how to live. I'm a typical alcoholic. I'm not afraid of dying. Never was. I'm afraid of living. You know, living is the thing I'm scared to death of. Typically, I'd rather die than be embarrassed. You know. And so I had all those kinds of lessons and insights to learn. I was terrific at self-analysis, and I knew nothing about self-knowledge. You know, I could describe myself like in a clinical term to anybody who took enough time to listen, but I didn't have any understanding at all about what I liked or who I was. I'd lied from the womb, you know. I come out of the womb lying, repackaging, fashioning reality. Deception is my long suit, you know. I lied to my family, I lied to schools, I lied to friends, I lied to myself. You know, what I needed AA was to a corrective lens so I could see the truth and be able to express it sometimes. I still lie. I have to notice what I'm saying when I'm talking to people. My mouth has a life of its own. You know, if you're not listening, people say, "Did you see whatever the play was?" And I say, "Yeah, sure, I saw it." And you know, I'd read a review maybe 6 months ago, and I'm filling it in like I'd seen it. You know, like those cars, you know, you turn off the ignition on a hot summer day, and it still starts to go. My mouth's like that, you know, when it's lying. Anyway, success can be more corrosive to me personally. I can stop hearing when I'm okay. You know, recovery brings, I got a job, I got some money, I got a new car, I've got relationships going. Who can tell me anything? You know, arrogance comes back. I stop really hearing people when I get into that mode. The theology of triumph. How wonderful and powerful and great I am. I've survived alcoholism. You know, that kind of thinking. And I'll tell the others how to do it. You know, that kind of thinking. I've lost the theology of the sufferer, the fellow sufferer who needs AA probably in a lot of ways more today than when I entered AA. You know, when I entered, I just needed not to drink that day. But now there's a whole different need that I have to be emotionally sober. so that I don't self-destruct emotionally. And that's what the steps are about. The steps are about anchoring me emotionally. So I'm not intoxicated with my emotions, with fear, flooded with fear, which I can be. I had to give up reading the Times every day because I was so busy writing letters and wanting to march and picket that I couldn't get out of the house. I can worry about something I didn't know 3 minutes ago, and use all my energy for that so I can't clean up my room. So I have to put first things first, and that's a consciousness with a power greater than myself, or my day gets out of hand quickly. When left to my own devices, I can really get into great trouble. And I think those things are true for us collectively. Alcoholics have been noticed. People have known about alcoholism for a long time, and I'm just going to read a few things because of time, and I know we all want to see the slides. But a couple of things to lay the groundwork. That one of the ways I can celebrate and treasure and be grateful for my own recovery is to hear other people's stories. Other people's stories of relapsing has been enormously helpful to me. My first sponsor drank after 2 years, and he said, Frank, it was like a head transplant. As soon as I started drinking, I had a different head on my body. I saw things differently. I forgot everything about AA and didn't care. And that helped me really not even to consider that. I'd never really in a sustained way held the thought of drinking again. And I thought about hanging myself on a daily basis for 4.5 years. But I never had a sustained thought of drinking again because of that thing that he said. By the way, I hear so much intensity when I speak. When I'm getting ready, I'm pretty cool and everything, and and I've talked about this kind of stuff before, so I always think I'm going to be laid back and cool, and then I hear this other voice take over, ringing with intensity. Bertrand Russell wrote that when, one of the chief symptoms of an impending nervous breakdown is a belief that one's work is very important. And I know that that's the mode I'm getting into. What I'm talking about here is very, very important here. But I just want to show you some things that I've been blessed with people pointing out to me over the years that, alcoholism has been noticed for a long time, since the first reported messages in the Bible, not a book I refer to nearly enough as I should. But 2,000 years, am I doing this right? 800 years before Christ, the man Solomon observed this about alcoholism, and I'm sure a lot of you have known it, or have seen it. Who hath woe, who hath sorrow, who hath contentions, who hath babbling, who hath wounds without cause? Sounds like Martha's story and Judy's story, doesn't it? And my own. Who hath redness of eyes? They that tarry long at the wine, they that go to seek mixed wine. Look not upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth its color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. At last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder. Thine eyes shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things. Some identification I bet out there. Yea, that shall be as he that lieth down in the midst of the sea, or he that lieth upon the top of the mast, weaving. I like that joke about the guy walking 1 foot in the gutter, 1 foot in the sidewalk. Thank God I'm drunk. They have stricken me, thou shalt say, and I was not sick. They have beaten me, and I have felt it not. When shall I awake? I will seek it yet again. After all that, as soon as come to, you're looking for another drink. So about 3,000 years ago, Solomon knew about progression of alcoholism. He knew how baffling it was to watch an alcoholic go through all of that stuff and then seek another drink in the morning. People have read that book for many, many years. I mean, the knowledge of alcoholism has been around for a long, long time. Along about after our Revolutionary War in 1785, a man called Benjamin Rush, He was one of the signers of a Declaration of Independence. He was a prominent physician. He started a medical college in Pennsylvania. A very prominent colonialist and well respected. He wrote a paper, a 40-page paper, on the aspects of the ardent spirit, the effects of the mind and body of ardent spirits of alcohol. And it was all over the colonies, and it was all over the early country. It was one of the pieces used by the temperance movement. And in it he goes through, I neglected to bring a copy of it with me, but in it he goes through all of the symptoms of acute alcoholism in their order of appearance. In it he calls alcoholism an odious disease. This is 1785. And he writes the progressiveness of alcoholism, the nature of it. And he points out there that the answer for alcoholism is abstinence. When I came to AA in 1970, I was stunned that the answer was abstinence. It never occurred to me not to drink. You know, I always thought, oh God, I shouldn't be drinking at 4 in the morning, you know, when you got to go to work the next day. You know, all those things. Or why do I have to have 40 drinks when everybody else is satisfied with 11? You know, that kind of stuff. I would always, or, you know, why am I such a high-risk drinker? You know, just when I should have been most together is when I was most out of control. That kind of stuff. But it never occurred to me not to drink, because I was a drinker. You know, people knew that Frank was a drinker. You know, for Christmas, nobody gave me a shirt or a necktie. They gave me a blender or ice cube trays or booze or wine or something. They knew if they gave me a necktie, it was a mistake, you know, and I knew it was a mistake. But my heart leapt with joy if I got something associated with booze. And anyway, so throughout history, people have known about alcoholism and knew it was progressive, knew it was fatal. So it's no mystery that alcoholism has been a problem. Along about our Civil War, there was something called the Washingtonians, and that's mentioned in AA Comes of Age. The Washingtonians was a group in 1840 that started in Baltimore, 6 drunks that met every night. Suddenly, they had heard, they got tired of being like that, I guess. Their moment had come, their bottom had come collectively. And they sent one of their members down to go hear the temperance people. He came back the next night and he said, I think they're on to something. And they all went the 3rd night. And they all spontaneously stopped drinking, the 6 of them. And they were to start something called the Washingtonians, because he was the father of George Washington's name they chose, because he was the father of liberty, and here they were getting liberty from booze. And they started a group. They were abstinent. They stopped drinking right there in the moment. They helped each other, alcoholics helping each other. They evangelized. They went out carrying the message to others and brought them in. In less than a year, they started in March. In less than a year, by Christmas, there were 1,000 members of the Washingtonians. You remember that it took us 4.5 years to get the first 100. Bill got sober in December of 1934, and when the book was written, when our big book was written, there were 100, and that was April of 1939. And some people said we didn't even have 100 when the book was. They thought, well, we could have 100 by the time we get the book all done. So they used the figure 100. But anyway, the Washingtonians did 1,000 in less than a year. In a very short period of time, depending on what newspaper you were reading, 5 to 6 years, they had 400,000 to 600,000 recovered sots in the Washingtonians. This was when the population of the country was 20 million. You know, AA today would have to be 10 million just in the United States to have the same ratio to our population, the U.S. population, as the Washingtonians did. And yet, who heard of the Washingtonians today but people who read AA Comes of Age, or some people who are particularly interested in history of alcoholism and Alcoholics Anonymous? But they had a lot of the elements that we have. You know, in about 12 years, it was written about them that they had lost their fire. They got into divisiveness. They got into other issues. They were infiltrated by people who had causes, people who were in favor of making the whole country dry, prohibition people, and other people who didn't want that. So they got into an enormous amount of legislation problems, political problems, who to support, and money-raising problems, all kinds of things. And one of their leaders drank again, and that was plastered all over the newspapers. Anyway, we begin to sense that they didn't have our traditions. One of the reasons they were so vulnerable is they didn't have 12 traditions for keeping emotionally sober as a group. And they certainly didn't have anonymity, which is the foundation, the spiritual foundation of all our traditions. Anyway, in 12 years, I often use whatever happened to those 300,000 to 400,000 alcoholics who tasted, got a good taste of sobriety, but then again, in a short period of time, had nowhere to go to renew it, to refreshen themselves. Along about the turn of the century, something called the Emmanuel Movement came along. It was a time of William James and Mary Baker Eddy, and people who were very conscious of the fact that if you could somehow marry the power of medicine with the power of religion, you would have an enormous force for reclaiming troubled souls. And who are those troubled, obvious souls, as Solomon knew, and Benjamin Rush knew, and a lot of other people knew? By the way, on the second anniversary of the Washingtonians, Abraham Lincoln spoke to them at their anniversary. So they had enormous support, and yet it didn't save them. Anyway, back to the Emmanuel group. They had things like relaxation techniques, prayer. They had a lot of things that we had, and they got into controversy. Initially, the medical people got along beautifully with the religious people, spiritual people, and but as the success of the enterprise grew, there became more and more conflict of who really was the component, the most valued component. Was it the physician who checked the guy out, or was it the religious counselor? They called them friendly counselors instead of sponsors that helped them. Anyway, they got into public controversy about who should have, and in a very short period of time, very few people knew about the Emmanuel groups, and yet at one time they were very, very successful. Closer to our own thing was the Oxford groups. You remember Frank Bookman in 1920 started something that was to be called the Oxford groups. It was an enormously powerful force for good, a spiritual movement on a one-to-one basis. And I won't go into Frank Bookman's story, but he had a personal transforming experience, and he found out that if he shared it with somebody else, it not only reinforced him, but it frequently helped the other person. And he started this thing called what was to be called the Oxford groups. It was first called the First Century Christianity Society or something, and then it became the Oxford groups, because he was very effective in dealing with young people at Oxford University, at Princeton University here. And he ran into people like Sam Shoemaker, closer to our own thing. But both independently, both our co-founders joined the Oxford groups. Dr. Bob, after a man, Harvey Firestone's son, Bud Firestone, that got sober, the tire magnate in Akron, Ohio, he got sober, and out of gratitude, his father brought all the members, or a big 10 or 12 members, of the Oxford group to speak in Akron. And they did it for a week. They blitzed all the churches, they got an enormous amount of publicity, and Dr. Bob started to go to Oxford group meetings with people like Henrietta Seiberling. Meanwhile, back in New York, Bill, his friend Ebby, carried the message to Bill and started to bring Bill into the Oxford groups. At one time, the Oxford groups could fill the Hollywood Bowl. There were 27,000 people in the Hollywood Bowl for an Oxford group meeting. There were 10,000 who couldn't get in that stood outside. Who heard of the Oxford groups today but people in Alcoholics Anonymous? Their demise was sudden and swift. At one time, people like Fiorello LaGuardia, Harry Truman, all these people were participants in the Oxford groups. And yet, very swiftly, on the eve of World War II, they began to get bad publicity. They began to break their anonymity. Bookman made a decision to go after the world leaders rather than just one-to-one person. He made a choice thinking that if you got the leaders, the others would follow. Anyway, the point is we've learned our lessons from all these people that went before and didn't make it. And Bill began to sense that in the early 40s. You know the story that he on a business trip, a proxy fight trip to Akron, it didn't go well for him. He lost the proxy fight. He didn't become the president of this company. And this is after long, as you know from reading Bill's story, long-term unemployment. His dream was crushed. He's at the Mayflower Hotel in Akron, and he heard the noisy bar at the other end. I understand it's called the Parisian Room. And a church director was at the other end. And fate, God, or whatever, higher power, put him in closer proximity to the church directory, where he got the name Walter Tunks. Not only did he get that name, but he was able to act on it and call Walter Tunks. Walter Tunks gave him a list of some people, one of whom knew Henrietta Seiberling. And on Mother's Day 1935, he met Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob, you remember, was drunk, and he brought a potted plant home to his wife, Anne, and she said the potted plant was on the table, and her potted husband was under the table. So he couldn't meet him on Saturday, he had to meet him on Sunday. And Dr. Bob was only going to stay 5 minutes, he stayed 6 hours. And the beginning of one drunk carrying this message to another drunk began. You know, and that's not so long ago. Mother's Day, 1935. Dr. Bob drank again on a medical convention trip to Atlantic City, but on June 10th he had his last beers. You remember Bill gave him a beer as he went in to perform an operation. Scary, he was a proctologist. You don't even want to think of that. But right after his operation he went and started making amends. You know, because he knew, for 2.5 years he'd been in the Oxford group. He knew that he had to clean house, trust God, and help others. He just moment had come with his sobriety that he was able to act on those things. And from those two people in the summer of 1935, Alcoholics Anonymous is in, before the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia broke up, 134 countries, and about, conservatively, over 2 million people. But that's in 58 years. You know, our name is Alcoholics Anonymous. 50% of our name is alcoholic, and 50% of our name is anonymous. And there are a lot of people, both in and outside AA, that doesn't think that those names any longer fit. They don't think we should be anonymous anymore. What are we hiding for? What have we got to worry about? We should come out of the closet, blah, 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 trumpet who we are and what we are. And another viewpoint is, well, now that we've demonstrated we have a critical mass of sober alcoholics, why don't we go after other problem people? But all these problems came up in the 40s. You know, if we read AA Comes of Age, those problems came up in the 40s. Bill broke his own anonymity thinking he could help people. Marty Mann broke hers, starting something that was to be called the National Council. But they began to get clear in the late 40s and early 50s that you got to do something different. You have to make some kind of sacrifices if this thing is to last. Because if the evil, as Bill calls them, the evil genii of money, power, and prestige was to get loosed among us, it would destroy us, that it had destroyed the Oxford groups, that it had destroyed the Washingtonians, that it had destroyed the Emmanuel groups. You know, all of the things that reside in all of our souls reside in Alcoholics Anonymous. I like to just quote from page 96 of Alcoholics Anonymous. It Comes of Age. Implicit. This is just at the beginning of the discussion on the essays on the 12 traditions. By the way, if you're ever asked to lead a tradition meeting, and I know that makes us all sick, the thought of that. But if you ever, these essays are incredibly powerful tools just to read to people. They're like poetry. So Bill writes, implicit throughout AA's tradition is the confession that our fellowship has its sins. We confess that we have character defects as a society and that these defects threaten us continually. Our traditions are a guide to better ways of working and living, and they are also an antidote to our various maladies. The 12 traditions are to group survival and harmony what AA's 12 steps are to each member's sobriety and peace of mind. But the 12 traditions also point straight to many of our individual defects. By implication, they ask each of us to lay aside pride and resentment. They ask for personal as well as group sacrifice. Not a word you hear bandied around a lot about sacrifice. We hear issues and other words come to mind from at least my meetings. I don't know if you have them, but we have them. You can, I call them group depression meetings. You can go on a sun-filled day and have a new shirt. You got the big dance planned that night. And in, 12 to 20 minutes into the meeting, there's no reason to go on. We're never going to get better. Nobody ever mentions a higher power or any kind of method for getting over our ills. And you need a meeting to get over the meeting. You have to all jump in a cab and get to a meeting. But the 12 steps also point straight to many of our individual defects. By implication, they ask each of us to lay aside pride and resentment. They ask for personal as well as group sacrifice. They ask us never to use the AA name in any quest for personal power or distinction or money. The traditions guarantee the equality of all members and the independence of all groups. They show us how we may best relate ourselves to each other and to the world outside. They indicate how we can best function in harmony as a great whole. For the sake of the welfare of our entire society, traditions ask that every individual and every group and every area of AA shall lay aside all personal desires, ambitions, and untoward actions that could bring serious division among us or lose us the confidence of the world at large. The 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous symbolize the sacrificial nature of our life together, and they hold the greatest force for unity that we know. Success, I think, can be more corrosive, as the other ones pointed out, to collective bodies, too. At one time, we could all fit around a kitchen table in Akron, Ohio. Now we can fill pretty hotels, huge Olympic stadiums. Those of us who were blessed to be at the Seattle convention where 50,000 alcoholics had a moment of silence that was thunderous. We can do that. We can lose the fact that we're fragile. We're as fragile today as we were in 1935 by the evidence of other people. I'm as fragile as I was when I entered Alcoholics Anonymous. That's not something we want to linger on. We want to, my nature wants me to think of myself as invincible. But that's not the reality of alcoholism. You remember the man who brought Bill the message of the Oxford groups, Ebby. He was to drink again and again. He never had sustained sobriety. I think that's very poignant, that a man with all the passion and conviction and insights at one time could lose it. Just because I'm sober and happy today doesn't mean I'm going to be tomorrow, unless, as the big book, text of the big book talks about, I look into my spiritual condition today. I didn't get drunk on yesterday's drinking when I was drinking. I had to have fresh alcohol to stay drunk each day. And I can't stay happy, sober, and useful on yesterday's spiritual awakening or yesterday's spiritual insights. I have to have some kind of thing to allow me to celebrate this day. And joyously in AA, we have unlimited opportunity to see that happen. The transformation of other people we sponsor, people we see at our meetings, to carry a message to them, can reignite our own fire in spirits. And we need each other. I need a method, I need a personal method for my personal recovery, the 12 steps to transform my life. But I also need the 12 traditions to keep a spiritual community where I have to go, and a community where I'll have healing. We all know a meeting that's a gathered AA meeting, we have access to information that we don't have anywhere else. We have self-knowledge that is not available to us elsewhere. And we all experience that, otherwise we wouldn't be here on a Saturday afternoon. We all know what that means. When a light goes on deep in our souls, and we're aware of a different relationship with ourselves and a higher power and other people that we have not witnessed elsewhere. You know, that spiritual moment that happens. And that's what the 12 traditions can do, to create an environment where that can happen. Emotional sobriety environment within our groups. Just the same as the only thing the steps can do for me is create an environment where I can feel the power of God, where I have access to the power of God. That's all I can do. The rest of it's God's problem. But the 12 steps can help me to get rid of the debris that I have in my life that separates me from the power of God. The other distractions I have in my life, my ego, you know, and the temptations of evil forces or whatever. And that takes all my energy. And what we can do, and I've talked enough now, we're going to go through some slides and see the people that were involved in fashioning Alcoholics Anonymous into what it is today. And it all came from suffering. You know, none of it came easy, none of it came cheap or fast. A lot of people died for us to get where we are today. A lot of people made enormous sacrifices to give us access to what we can, if you're like me, take for granted. You know, when I walked in AA in 1970, it never occurred to me to drink again, because I saw a critical mass of people who weren't drinking. So I had that kind of, my imagination was open, where I saw people who were long-term people who weren't drinking. I didn't know, I was never conscious of that before, that there was a body of people who didn't drink. You know, and that's the kind of thing we have to make sacrifice to keep, so that people after us will also have that experience. Okay, do I take this experience and spiritual experience? And he was set on his way to touch the lives of many, many people. And as I mentioned, our co-founders. But along the way, Sam Shoemaker, who became very, very influential, a man called Roland Hazard, who you'll see a little later, a number of people. Here is Dr. Bookman on the right with Konrad Adenauer. After the war, Bookman was credited with helping expedite the reconciliation between France and Germany. And here's Roland Hazard with his mother and father. Roland's on the right. He was a man who, you remember, can you hear? Is this okay? No, are people hearing? Does anyone hear? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Turn it up. Okay. Wouldn't be fun if it weren't complicated, would it? Sorry for doing that. Is that better? In the back? Wave your hands if you can't hear. Okay, that's Roland on the right, and he was a man, you remember, a very prominent Rhode Island family, and he kept getting drunk. He was sent to everybody to be cured, and finally he wound up at the hands of Carl Jung in Zurich, and he was with Jung for a year and got sober, and then came back to the States and got drunk again, and went back to Jung, and Jung said to him, "I can't do anything more for you." And he said, "Well, what can I do?" And Jung said, "Well, I've heard of alcoholics who have gotten sober in the spiritual movement." And he pointed in the direction of the Oxford groups. He came back to New York, got involved with Calvary Church, and lo and behold, got sober. And he was a man who carried the message to Ebby, and then he and Ebby carried the message to Bill. And here's Seba Graves, another member of the Oxford groups at Calvary Church, and he and Roland, you remember, some of you might remember the story, they carried the message to Eddie. Eddie was about to be sent off to a mental hospital because he had driven a car through somebody's kitchen, and his family were very prominent in Albany, so they tried to do everything to keep him out of trouble. And finally, Roland and Seba went up and got him and brought him back to New York. The judge let him go, and Eddie got involved with the Oxford groups and was to get sober and carry the message to Bill. Here's some of the books. titles. Titles get your attention. For Sinners Only, and okay. Okay. For Sinners Only, you see, it was written by A.J. Russell, and he's the man who wrote God Calling, and which ultimately became a pattern for a 24-hour book. But he was a man, a newspaper man, and he was sent to check out the Oxford groups in a critical way. And not only was he changed his own attitude, but he became a very prominent member of the Oxford groups. So that book is their basic text. That's sold in the millions and millions of copies, something like 90 printings of that book, I'm told. And then the other, I Was a Pagan, was another story quite like that, of a man who found his life changed by his association with the Oxford groups. Here's that paper that I mentioned where Harvey Firestone's kid, Bud Firestone, got sober. Prominent, he was the town drunk, and very wealthy family, yet he was always in trouble in Oxford. And so when he got sober, by a long chain of events, he got sober in the Oxford group, and his father was so grateful that his father arranged for all these members of the Oxford groups to come and put on kind of an evangelical movement in Akron. And this was on the front page of the Akron Times Press. And this is where Dr. Bob saw and began to get involved. Bob and Ann Smith began to get involved in the Oxford groups. That's Frank Bookman there. Sam Shoemaker was in that party. Walter Tunks is there. So a lot of the ingredients, the people that laid the groundwork for us, were in that session. Here's some more books of the Oxford group, so I'm going to move a little more quickly. Here's that basic text of what is the Oxford groups, and in it you can see, I don't know if I can read it from here, you cannot belong to the Oxford groups. It has no membership, and then it goes on to say pretty much all of the things that are in our preamble. There are no membership. You don't have to be associated with any religious body. We're self-supporting. All those things that we've adopted in our own preamble were part and parcel of the Oxford groups. It was a very informal, purely spiritual. As it cut down on rules, they found that the spiritual connection became stronger. Common Sense of Drinking. This was written by a man called Richard Peabody, who was in the Emmanuel group. He got sober in the Emmanuel groups, and he wrote this book, and this was a bestseller. It was published just about 1932, and it was in Bill's library. And he, too, says he was a recovered alcoholic. He didn't tell people that, but he was a recovered alcoholic, and he talked about abstinence in the text and all those things, and relaxation, and you'd have to carry the message to other people, but he was to drink again. It didn't have any connection. This book doesn't have any connection with a power greater than yourself. More of the Oxford group books. Here's William James, Variety of Religious Experience. Remember, his book was very important to Bill. He categorically states that that man needs a spiritual connection if he's to get over troubles like alcoholism. Here's his book, which is still in print. Very popular book. Here's Sam Shoemaker. He was the rector of Calvary Church. The Oxford groups didn't own any property either. They met in other people's property. In the case of the Oxford groups in this country, they used the Calvary Church here on 21st Street and Park Avenue South. Next to it was the Calvary House, where Ebby was to stay here for a while. They gave Ebby some housing here, but the offices of the Oxford groups in this country were in this building. Here's Bill and Ebby in the ballroom of the Roosevelt Hotel. And here's Bill's house in Brooklyn Heights. You remember he and Lois had this when Bill got sober, and they were to lose that house sober. Didn't have money to pay the mortgage during the Depression, so they were to leave that house. And here's Towns Hospital. Remember, Bill had 4 trips to Towns Hospital. It's still there on 89th Street and Central Park West, but it's an apartment building now. It's not a treatment center. Alcoholics still live there. I sponsored somebody who lived there, so it's still full of alcoholics. They're just not in treatment anymore in that building. And here, Knickerbocker Hospital. You remember after towns closed, the Dr. Silkworth and others went over to Knickerbocker Hospital. And here's Dr. Silkworth. He treated something like 40,000 drunks in his lifetime. Incredible man. He went to Dartmouth College, as did Dr. Bob. There's so many similarities in this kind of thing. Here's one a letter, Bill, a little note Bill was writing to Ebby at Christmas time. Ebby was drinking at the time, but Bill wrote this letter hoping to give Ebby some hope. And it's a letter of gratitude for helping change Bill's life. Here's one of the pictures of Bill that captures some of his charismatic qualities. By the way, I urge you all to it's on video, experience something called Markings on a Journey. It's a 38-minute video or film slide thing. It's 38 minutes of the history of AA. And it also has voices. It has, I think, 7 voices of these people. Bill's and Bob's, of course, but Sister Ignatia, Harry Tebow's, Bernard Smith, a number of voices of people. And their voices are like fingerprints. Not only what they say, the content of what they say, but how they say it. It's a very powerful experience for 38 minutes. You might want to show that to your group. Makes, I think, people leave that with a deep appreciation for what we have here. Here's the world-famous church directory in Akron. I'm told that they're opening the Mayflower Hotel, which now is a senior citizens residence, but they're opening it to tours during Founders Day. Here's Tunks. He looks like a happy man that you'd want to go talk to, doesn't he? And here's Henrietta Seibeling. You remember her gatehouse that they met. And here's the home of T. Henry Williams in Akron. They were Oxford Group members who lent their home to the early alcoholic groups. Dr. Bob took the third step on his knees upstairs in this house, where they took the third step prayer. Here's Dr. Bob and Ann Smith, sort of American Gothic, very good-natured, loving people. Here's their home in Akron. A lot of you have visited there. I'm told there are 12 steps leading up to that porch. Here's Henrietta's gatehouse, where they met in that fateful day in May. Here's the King Street School. They still have a King Street School group. That's where Dr. Bob gave the Bible. I think they still have that original Bible. And they still meet. Not in the school, I'm told, anymore, but nearby. Here's St. Thomas Hospital, where Sister Ignatia and Dr. Bob set up the treatment center. You remember at the Flower Room, where they dried up drunks and told them about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Here's the City of Akron Hospital, where Bill D., the third man, who was, I think, in August. I think he got sober in August 1935, was. And Dr. Bob worked there. It's Dr. Bob. Here's Bill and Bob together. We don't have too many pictures. I think only 3 of them together. You'll notice their neckties match the curtain. Those neckties are coming back. Here's Sister Ignatia in a musical moment. She and Dr. Bob did that thing at St. Thomas Hospital, and then she went on to Rosary Hall up in Cleveland and devoted still more of her life to serving the alcoholic. Not an alcoholic herself, but apparently had alcoholism in her family. And here's Ann Smith, a very spiritual lady, and a big source of strength, of course, to the early members in Akron. Here's a very powerful book that Bill found, and Carl Jung again, Modern Man in Search of a Soul. In it, he categorically says he has never seen anybody recover from psychoneurosis that does not found a power greater than himself. It's very affirming, as is his letter, which we'll see later, to our program. Sermon on the Mount was an early book that it goes into the reasons for anonymity and a lot of the key principles behind our program are discussed here by Emmett Fox. Bill used to go to Emmett Fox meetings in New York. They were held at Carnegie Hall, which was just a half a block from Steinway Hall, where 200 or 300 alcoholics met on Saturday night. And then they'd all go, not all of them, but many of them would go up to hear Emmett Fox up the street. And here's the first office was in Newark, New Jersey, William Street. That's where they brought the big book together. Ruth Hawk should be next. Yeah, she's the non-alcoholic secretary. She said there were 40 drafts of the big book. As it was being, they'd send around pieces of it to Akron and Cleveland and New York and work it out. Some of the early pamphlets that were done, center one was a pickup of the article in Saturday Evening Post. And here's Bill's brother-in-law, Leonard Strong. He paid for the 4 trips Bill had to Towns Hospital, or at least for some of them, certainly the last one. And he was also the conduit to the Rockefellers. He knew somebody who worked for Dick Richardson, who was a member of the Rockefeller Foundation board. And he was the one, after Alcoholics Anonymous started a forum, that thought that they could get some help. Harry Emerson Fosdick, he was the conduit for the Rockefeller money. He worked at, he was the rector at Riverside Church, which our office is right across the street from, prophetically now. And it's the street that separates us from Riverside Church, and the building we're in now is called Reinhold Niebuhr Street, the guy who is credited with the Serenity Prayer. Here's Frank Amos. He was dispatched by Rockefeller to check out AA after Rockefeller learned about us, and he came back from Akron with a recommendation that Rockefeller should fund a chain of hospitals, that he should employ alcoholics to go carry the message, and he should finance the big book, and he should immediately put up $50,000. And Rockefeller said money would spoil it, and gave seed money, about $5,000 over some years, which the Alcoholics Anonymous were to pay back to him by the mid-40s. And since the mid-40s, we've been self-supporting. Here's Father Ed Dowling, Jesuit. And you remember the story, on one rainy night in 1940, he wanted to check AA out, so he went to the 24th Street Clubhouse, where Bill and Lois, after they lost their house, they were living over the clubhouse. And he climbed up the stairs and he wanted to meet Bill. Bill thought he was a drunk, he just wanted to talk. But they became very good friends, and he was the first really big supporter of the Roman Catholic Church that supported the fellowship. And here's Frank Exman. He was the religious editor for Harper Brothers and did a lot of editing on both the Big Book and the 12 and 12. And here's the entrance to the 24th Street Clubhouse. It was an enclosed alleyway, and over it you see it says the last mile. You would walk in this dark alley, and then you'd see the light at the end of the tunnel. It was very full of metaphor, and probably scared most drunks to death entering a dark hallway. Here's where Lois and Bill lived, over the 24th Street Clubhouse. Here's the entrance to it. It's no longer there. It's now a high-rise building, but it looks kind of sinister, doesn't it? And here's it had cheerful inside. It was paneled nicely, and that's a picture of course, portrait of Bob and Bill and Dr. Silkworth. After they lost their lease there, they went over here to this, it used to be a collegiate church, Dutch Reformed church on West 41st Street. And this is a church on hard times. They were building the Lincoln Tunnel, so all the people around there were now it was just becoming driveway entrance to the tunnel. But they left the church standing, and you can see it has a restaurant bar sign on it on the right. So it had become a restaurant bar, and then it fell further and became an AA meeting place. So the little poor place was on the skids. And here's the first international convention was in Cleveland, 1950. Then St. Louis. You see those little round heads there in the row that separates the two sections? Those little like Martian heads. they were all put in to fill up the empty spaces, so that it looked like there were more of us there than were. Not rigorous honesty, but they wanted to send out a picture with looked like a lot of people there anyway. This one they didn't have to do that. This is Long Beach, 1960. That's Bill on the stage, and I understand it was freezing in Long Beach, and he spoke 3 hours. So they were real cold by the end of it. Some people said a lot of people left, and other people said nobody moved. So you don't know what happened there. And then we went on to Toronto, 1965. I Am Responsible pledge came from Toronto. This was a big, huge picture, and then people passed it around and they all signed it. It's kind of nice, like a big greeting card. And here's Miami, 1970. This is the last one Bill spoke at. He was dying of emphysema. They rushed him from the hospital. They didn't expect him to appear at all. Other people were substituting for him all weekend. But finally, on Sunday morning, they whisked him from the oxygen in a wheelchair with oxygen, and he pulled himself up, and he spoke for about 3 or 4 minutes, and I'm told it was one of the most powerful experiences of people's lives to witness that. And then, of course, he went back to the hospital, and then he flew to New York, and in and out of hospitals until he died the following January. Here's Denver. Let's see, this has got to be 1975. They had a two-story coffee maker in this thing. See, they had spigots all over where you could just pull on it and it delivered coffee. They said the coffee was like rat pee, but it was so convenient, you know. But they never did it again at another convention. That was the last they did it. And here's New Orleans, 1980. It was 110 in the shade there, but it was a very powerful experience. And Toronto, 1985. The city of Montreal. I'm sorry. City of Montreal opened the subways to us. They just didn't try to charge all these people to get in the subway. Here's Bill and Bob in the 40s having their picture took and looking very happy. And here, that's Dr. Bob standing up. To his right is Lois in the hat, and that's Bill to Lois's right. To Dr. Bob's left is Bill D. This is, I think, 1945, June 10th, 1945, in Akron, Ohio, an anniversary. AA was 10 years old. And you see, to preserve anonymity, all the people have their napkins up to their face. You see that? It looks like a group sneeze, you know, but that was the way they tried to deal with the anonymity issue. Here's Works Publishing. You remember they thought the book would sell a minimum of 100,000. They could only afford to produce 5,000 at the time for the first printing of the first edition, and they sold stock in it, $25 a share. Bill held on to 200 shares, and Hank Parkhurst held on to 200, and they sold 200. And it was a hard sell because alcoholics didn't want to buy shares in a corporation where the little book wasn't selling. But they had great expectations for the book. It's very ironic. It took 37 years to sell 1 million copies. We now sell almost 1 million a year, even though the last few years they've been declining. But we still sell about 900,000 of them a year. And they really took off in sales after Bill died. But it was a slow start for the big book. And here's the checks where they repaid Rockefeller. You see, not a lot of organizations have checks written to Rockefeller, and Charlie Towns. They paid off Charlie Towns, had loaned some money. And here's McCormick, Austin McCormick. I often forget his name. He's a very gentle soul, non-alcoholic member of our board. who was very helpful in getting AA into correctional facilities. He's a penologist, a very respected man, and quiet, gentle soul, and a very active member of our board. Here's Leroy Chipman, member of the Rockefeller board, who became a member of the Alcoholic Foundation board. Rockefeller didn't give too much money for Rockefeller, but he gave an enormous amount of his people an enormous amount of publicity. If you were dealing with the Rockefellers in the early 40s, you had credibility, something we would not have had by ourselves. And this is Bernard Smith. Looks like a mean drunk, but he was a non-alcoholic, I'm told, and was very helpful in helping create our general service structure, where the groups really run things. It was obvious when he became the chairman of the board, it was obvious that Dr. Bob's health was failing, and that there'd have to be some mechanism for AA to survive after the demise of their co-founders. And he helped study this. This is Dick Richardson. He was the conduit to the Rockefeller that Leonard Strong knew. He was a minister, a very gentle soul. They all called him Uncle Dick. And it was his office that they first met. Bill first met him, and then they arranged a meeting with Rockefeller. And here's Leonard Harrison, another member of the Rockefeller board. I'm going to move along quickly here. Here's Jack Anderson. He wrote the article in the Saturday Evening Post. I'm sorry for doing that so quickly. There were 2,000 members before his article on March 1 of 1941. And within a year after his article, there were 8,000 members. A fourfold increase in 1 year. You can imagine if that were to happen to us today. And here's Harry Thibault, Bill's psychiatrist. He was a psychiatrist at Blythewood, where Marty Mann got sober. He was a man who gave Marty Mann the book in manuscript, and Marty Mann got sober and then began to attend meetings in Bill's house. Here's Marty. She was the founder of the National Council. Here are people going to Bill's house for a meeting in Brooklyn Heights. Here's Bill at the 1953 General Service Conference, the third conference, the Roosevelt Hotel. And here are three non-alcoholic chairmen of the board. That's Dr. Jack on the left, Gordon Patrick in the middle, and Milton Maxwell in the far right. Here's Bunky, they called him, and he founded the Yale School for Alcohol Studies, which is now at Rutgers. The bell-shaped curve, who is that? It begins with a J. Jelinek. Yeah, thank you. And a good friend of Bill's. Here's Lois at one of her picnics. You get a sense of her charisma. Here she is about a year or two before she died. She lived to be 97 and a half. She wanted to go for 100. And she almost made it. And but very active right until the end. Here's Bill, 1966. He has rubbers on with holes in them. And but just on the left-hand corner, you can just see the dust jacket of his big book. Here's Bill and Lois. She's at the piano. He's got his violin, a musical moment for them at their home in Stepping Stones. Here's Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, Jr., who was the instrument. Here's a wonderful letter that he wrote. Bill had sent him a copy of the second edition, and I think almost a year later he acknowledged it. But he says, I'm just going to summarize this because I want to read the next letter, and I know we're running a little late here. Yeah, quite late. He just said, must give you much satisfaction to know that the chain of events you set in motion by carrying the first message to Dr. Bob has now benefited so many of your fellows. And it's a very poignant letter. For those of you who would like to read it in its entirety, let me know, and I'll let you know. Here's Carl Jung, and he was the man, as I reported earlier, that sent Brolin on his way. And here's his letter, which is very, very powerful. I don't know if I have enough cord to do this. I've not had good experiences with this. Portions of this I think I'd like to. I can probably see it from here. My eyes are worse. Some of you are not. Bill finally wrote to Jung in January of 1961. He had thought about it for years, but he finally got to it, got around to it in 61, and it was prophetic because right after Jung was to die. So anyway, Bill wrote this letter acknowledging the connection, the link that Jung had formed in the establishment of Alcoholics Anonymous. He got this powerful letter back from Dr. Jung. Your letter was very welcome indeed. I had no news of Roland H. Anymore, and often wondered what had been his fate. Our conversation, which he has adequately reported to you, had an aspect of which he did not know. The reason that I could not tell him everything was that in those days I had to be exceedingly careful of what I said. I had found out that I was misunderstood in every possible way. Thus, I was very careful when I talked to Roland H. But what I really thought about was the result of many experiences with men of his kind. His craving for alcohol was the equivalent, on a low level, of the spiritual thirst for being, for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. How could one formulate such an insight in a language that is not misunderstood in our days? The only right and legitimate way to such an experience is that it happens to you in reality, and it can only happen to you when you walk on a path which leads to a higher understanding. You might be led to that goal by an act of grace, or through a personal and honest contact with friends, or through a higher education of the mind beyond the confines of mere rationalism. I see from your letter that Roland H. had chosen the second way, which was, under the circumstances, obviously the best one. I'm strongly convinced that the evil principle prevailing in this world leads the unrecognized spiritual need into perdition if it is not counteracted either by a real religious insight or by the protective wall of a human community. As ordinary men not protected by the action from above and isolated in society cannot resist the power of evil, which is called very aptly the devil. But the use of such words arouse many mistakes. That one can only keep aloof from them as much as possible. These are the reasons why I could not give a full and sufficient explanation to Roland. But I am risking it with you because I conclude from your very decent and honest letter that you have acquired a point of view that above the misleading platitudes one usually hears about alcoholism. You see, alcohol in Latin is spiritus, and you use the same word for the highest religious experience as well as most depraving poison. The helpful formula, therefore, is spiritus contra spiritum. Thank you again for your kind letter. I mean, yours sincerely, C.G. Jung. And then he has a little P.S. As the heart panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. Psalm 42:1. A very powerful affirmation. And that's all the slides. Thanks for your patience and listening.